I want to share this morning from Luke chapter 19. And as you have your scriptures with you, if you want to scroll there on your phone or tablet or open your scripture, your hard copies, we're going to look at a story from Luke chapter 19 of the man Zacchaeus. And as you're turning there, I just want to put my own plug in for the couples retreat. Last year, we were fairly new we had lived overseas and we were kind of readjusting. And we went to the couples retreat, and it was one of the highlights of the year, huh, Jen? We didn't know a lot of people, and it was such a good time. And actually, some people actually made it way, and you know who you are, and to actually help Jen and I attend that retreat. And it was just a highlight. I told Paul and Dawn last Sunday, oh man, it's such a good time, like getting to know people and sharing meals and being by the lake. Like you said, it's beautiful. So I'd encourage you we're looking forward to that as well. And I know Louie and Joni are going to be awesome. So we're looking forward to their teaching. So Luke chapter 19, I'm going to start in verse 1. So Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not. If you want a good accent, what's a good, Robert, a good British accent? A wee little man was he, yeah? That's the song that we... No, don't go. He said, good try, Tim. Just because you lived in Scotland doesn't mean you're British. That's good. So he was a short man. He could not see because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. In verse 7, all the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of all my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost. Have you ever been unsure of something or how to approach somebody or some group, and you have to choose your approach? And I think this passage gives us a really good understanding of what God is like in terms of how he approaches us, especially if we're on the margins of belief. Or when Jesus has to say, he's one of you too. He's a son of Abraham too. He's one of you. He's not just a chief tax collector. So we get his employment history. But have you ever been unsure how to approach something? I have, and I have to apologize ahead of time for this example, because if you've ever been a clown, maybe you were a rodeo clown or a circus clown, or that was your profession, I apologize ahead of time. But I've never had good experiences with clowns. Never. And if you've never had a good experience with something, you approach things a little lightly, a little from a distance, even if you're interested. But I've had a checkered past with clowns. And I know recently, if you pay attention to Facebook, clowns have taken a real hit on their profession. I feel bad for them in some ways. But in other ways, I don't. And I'm thinking, no, they deserve to be shut down. And it goes all the way back. And again, I apologize. If this is your profession, I know that the clown industry is supposed to bring you joy. It's supposed to help people laugh and be lighthearted. But you know, even before I was young, we took a trip. My parents took us to Orlando, Florida when we were little. And I remember going to Circus World. I don't even know Circus World's around anymore. But at Circus World, I remember going and these clowns came around. And my parents were cruel in some ways. They took a picture and the clowns were reaching around my arm, my shoulder, and eating out of my popcorn that I had in my hand. Don't worry, we'll get back to the text. We're going somewhere. But I remember thinking, this is horrible. And this feeling inside, I'm so uncertain of this experience. I didn't like clowns anyways. My uncle had clown pictures. They weren't classic art pieces. They were just some nice clown pieces in his living room. And I remember we visited, I have to lay on the floor. And I remember at nighttime looking up at the wall and these two clown pictures. They were always there, and it unnerved me. It didn't help me sleep. It made the covers get higher, as if they couldn't see me if I pulled the covers over my head. And it goes all the way. Some of you like children's films. I mean, I remember taking my daughter Kirsten when she was very young. We went to the Toy Story 2. And the part that it gets to chuckle, some of you know that movie. He's telling the story. This little clown kind of turns, got a frowny face. And I remember my daughter looking at me, Dad, I want to leave. It's time to leave. And I said, I'm with you. And we left. I mean, don't tell her. She was really little. So now, I mean, she'd be like, Dad, man up. It's just a clown. It's okay. But she said, it's time to go. And only like a couple years ago, this is a true story. Ask my wife, Jen. She'll tell you. We were driving and we were on the west side of Scotland. We were at a place called Carlaverock, and there's a beautiful castle grounds, there ruins. And on the way back, we were going to stay the night, and we're driving down the road, and and it was Halloween. It was because it's timely. This is a timely example. It was Halloween, and a clown about 6'6" is walking down the road with a big knife, a big machete in his hand, walking down the road. And I'm thinking, well, he's probably going to a party. It's Halloween. And they dress up, just like we do here in the United States. And so, but it was really unnerving to me. I was so uncertain. And I'm in a line of traffic, and he's walking down the sidewalk. And I could look in my rearview mirror and look at him scaring people in their windows. Okay? And I'm thinking, no way. And my wife, she's a sweet lady. But she told me, if you know Jen, she's very nice, she told me, she said, if he comes to our window, I will take him out. Her voice got deep and strong, and it was going to be over. And I didn't want to see any of that. So I jumped, no joke, I jumped into the roundabout, lots of roundabouts, and I went a legal turn, and I went around, and I jumped in, and I just put the gas on, and I drove through the roundabout, and we were off, and my kids are looking back in the rearview mirror, and they're like, that was really weird, and they can sense my apprehension. I'm like, yeah, that's not right. Finally, this year, I receive they have folders that come in each week. And I looked in the folder and it said, you cannot dress up like a clown this year. And I was all, finally. But clowns are supposed to bring you joy. They're not supposed to bring you, make you so uncertain of who you are. But things can change. Things can turn for the worst. If you've always been told you're a sinner, people who are righteous don't go to your place. You would approach people like that with a certain distance, perhaps. But you might be interested in a man named Jesus who's coming through town. And the reputation has it that he's doing things for people and with people and relating to people that the rest of the establishment would not. But he's still kind of on the margins. The fact that Luke tells us he's a chief tax collector kind of gives us some insight into why later the people said he's a sinner. There's other translations that say he's a crook. He's not treating the people fairly. His mode of religion is flawed. So the first part of this, when we're looking through this text, is the approach. And the approach is Jesus, and again, Luke gives us an account of how tall he is, how short. There's a reason why he couldn't get through the crowd. But if this guy can bring joy to the people and the children that we see him with in the crowds, I really should get a look at this guy. And what does he do? He climbs a tree. Now, Jesus probably, with all the people around him walking on the street, we don't get a sense of how dense the crowd is, but he couldn't necessarily make it to the front of the crowd. He's at a distance. And his approach to Jesus is to say, let's see this guy. Let me get a look. And as things go, Jesus sees him and looks at him with all the people in the crowd and says, I see you. I see you in the crowd. Come down. Now, this is after the approach at a distance. Now Jesus is making their relationship public. And when your relationship with Jesus goes public, things can happen. People pay attention sometimes. So he comes out of the tree. And Jesus says, what? I need to go to your house. Jesus addresses him. I need to go to your address today. And I stay with you. And now this public relationship turns into something that probably Zacchaeus was trying to avoid. Did anybody ever tell you that church was supposed to bring you joy? That religion was supposed to bring you joy. It was good for you. If you don't know something's good for you, you might stay at a distance. If you think it's good for you, you're usually it's attractive. You want something of it. And Zacchaeus wants Jesus to come to his house. But the crowd already says, before Zacchaeus even gets, what's Zacchaeus' response? It's to come down and to meet Jesus. The crowd has a different way of looking at it. There's an interesting take on this passage that I hadn't thought much about before as I was studying this. But in Eugene Peterson's message, he says this starting in verse 7, and I'll just read through verse 10 again. He says, everyone who saw the incident was indignant and grumped. What business does he have getting cozy with this crook? Zacchaeus just stood there, a little stunned. He stammered apologetically, Master, I give away half my income to the poor. And if I'm caught cheating, I pay 4 times the damages. Does he have to give Jesus criteria for coming to his house? Not that giving is righteousness, but we know historically and biblically that giving is a first step into the kingdom. When our characters become, now Jen and I were at a fundraiser dinner last week, and there were lots of people there who don't know Jesus, but were very giving. I mean, that's just part of who they are. But we know in the scriptures that there's often times where people will say, they're giving of themselves, and they're no longer taking. Because why do the Jews see the chief tax collectors? They are takers. They are not givers. At least the IRS gives you a little bit back sometimes. Not all the time. Sometimes you got to pay. But there was less chance you were going to get some back if it was taken. And so this idea that he has to give criteria to Jesus for reason for why he should stay with him, why he should still come to his house. Initially he wanted to, but not sure now that the people are saying that he's a crook. Jesus, why you want to be associated with a crook? And so on. Jesus said, today is salvation day in this home. This is the message again. Here he is, Zacchaeus, son of Abraham. He's one of you. He's come down to meet me. And I saw him, and I want to know him. For the Son of Man came to find and restore the lost. If you look through a lot of different English translations, you'll find in that last passage that many of them agree that when it says, and Jesus, the Son of Man, he came to seek and save the lost. So when we're thinking about what God is like, he's really interested in people who are lost and finding their way home, being restored. But you know, there's a lot of people that you may know, that I know, that don't think this is good for them. They're not sure why it's good for them. It's more of the clown story. Religion used to make people happy, and now it doesn't make people as happy. It makes more burden than it does. Jesus just, he combats that kind of story. He's not interested how many times Zacchaeus went to the synagogue. He's really interested in getting to his heart. And it's a really sad time when experts of the law, of the text, begin to say, God does things this way in these times. And yet they hadn't heard the Spirit speak for many years, according to tradition. If you know the text, the experts might say, if you know the text, God doesn't come down to people sitting in trees and say, I want you to come with me. God's interested in global things, big things. He's a sovereign God, and yes, that's true. But like the songs we sang today, and I really like this phrase, a late mentor, Jerry Cook, one of Pastor Louis' mentors, one of the things I really like that he says, he used to say, that God is predictably good. I love that. You can expect him to be good. We sang about it. You're good, you're true, you're always good. But when the people that say they're the experts begin to say who's out and who's in, it becomes very difficult when Jesus walks around the margins and say, hey, you, I want to go to your house today. I want to be with you. Salvation's come to your house. That's one of the greatest statements. Our houses can be messy places. They're supposed to be the place of cultivation. You know, the places where you grow and you flourish together. That's our desire. That we grow and we learn and it's messy. It can be really messy sometimes. And during those times of trying to flourish, when the Son of God, the one that some people aren't sure about, a little bit uncertain, if God operates like those people, we might want to climb a tree and just look for a while. We're not those people. We wouldn't be those people. The church wouldn't be those people. The temptation is always there. And that is the guilt bait of you talked about the bait last week. Don't take the bait, Pastor Louis talked about last week. This is the bait passage in this text is where Zacchaeus is, where he hears the people saying, he's a sinner. I can't believe Jesus is going to his house. And Zacchaeus almost takes the bait because we're like Zacchaeus in some ways. We have to say, God, I really do want you, and I don't deserve you, but let me lay out all the good things that I've done to show you that it's okay for you to be related to me and to you to be associated. I'll be a good representative. I will. You ever felt that were you ever wondering if God really wanted to know you? If God really saw you in the crowd? And God really spoke your name when there was a mass and sea of people in the world? But he cared about you. He saw you. He sees you. If there's anything we walk away from this passage saying, Jesus sees the person who's not really trying to be seen. But some people come at that passage like, of course he's trying to be seen. He climbs a tree. If he's a tax collector, surely he has a big ego. He needs to be on. Luke makes it very clear. This guy's short. He can't see. And it must have been dense enough he can't get through the crowd to the front. He's not trying to, if he was trying to be seen, and you and I know when our faith becomes public, what kind of conversations can happen. No one likes their sin to be pointed out, and no one likes their livelihood to be called into question. Some people make a livelihood in ways that other people might go, I don't know if that's a good way to make a living. We live in Nevada. There's people who make livings in many different ways. I remember talking to a guy from Germany, and he said, there's churches in Nevada? In Reno? He was Roman Catholic. And I'm like, we don't have big cathedrals, that are empty. No, I was cheeky. I shouldn't have said that. We don't have big, but we have, there's lots of churches. There's churches everywhere. But don't you have people making a living doing certain things? that may not fit well within the scope of what Jesus might want to hang out with or whose home that may not fit well. What is Jesus? The Jesus point is not to use Zacchaeus just as a pawn so that he can show everybody how bad they are. That happens. I mean, every time Jesus relates to somebody that people don't think he should be relating to, people around them begin to say, oh, when he says things like, cast the first stone, who wants to call out the sinner? Everybody gets really quiet. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants our livelihood called into question. But if you want to talk about change, the change is saying, I will open my home to this guy that I was just trying to see from a distance. And the assurance is, if God is predictably good, that it is good for you and me. And how do we experience God's presence? Through each other, through people. So how do people know that something's good for them? When they experience the goodness of God through you and me. And they realize that Jesus has come to be a friend of this house. Aren't you glad? That is such the best news. No matter where you've been, no matter what you've done, no matter how far you want to observe. And I'm a big fan. I've told people in pastoral ministry, Lou, I've said, just come check it out. You know, if you want to observe from a distance, observe from a distance. If you don't want to take my word for it, don't take my word for it. But just observe and see the goodness of God in people's lives, how they treat each other. Some people, their suspicion of the church goes off the charts when they begin to think, that's what I thought. You ever heard that? That's how I knew somebody would do that to me. I've heard stories, but if you've had bad experiences with clowns like I have, you stay away. People tell you they're supposed to make you funny. They're supposed to make you laugh rather and have joy. But you know what? I can't put God and locate him just in one experience, one person. Because like the teachers of the law said, he is big. I can't deny that. He is glory. He is beyond us. But when he gets very local, very personal, I find great joy in the fact that God sees you. He sees me. That's really good encouragement. And I thought about sharing some things, and I thought, no, when you're building a sermon, I'm not too sure if that'll fit well. But I do feel impressed. This last year, in some ways, I felt like I had failed big time. I'd done a lot of schooling, but when I got to the end of my schooling, I came back, I thought it was done. My supervisor said, you're done. There's no problem. You're going to breeze through this. I know what a thesis looks like. I know what... And I didn't cruise through. That was not the deal. It was really difficult. One of the most difficult experiences I think I've faced. You might think, well, it's just the pain. No, it was like years of work, that you pour yourself into and your family sacrifices with you. And I remember thinking, man, I failed. And a friend of mine, actually a student, but he came up to me and he said, have you ever seen such and such? A guy talk about his doctoral experience. You need to listen to it. Because if you listen to it, you'll be encouraged. I did listen to it. And it was near the end of this last year. And I remember the day I went in to do my test, that I remember my exam, my oral exam. I remember sitting before the committee, but that morning, the Lord had impressed on my heart that passage of scripture. Do not be discouraged. Do not be afraid, from Joshua. That passage where he says, don't be discouraged. And I thought, he's pumping me up for something good. Like, I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to be discouraged. It's going to go well. It didn't go well. And in looking back, I'm thinking, well, maybe God was trying to encourage me that it was going to be okay. Don't get discouraged. The road might look a little different than you thought it was going to look. And I thought, it's going to look really different now. Really different. And I remember, and Jen can tell you, just the agony inside of feeling like, man, I messed it up. What happened? It was supposed to go smooth. You ever feel like that way? Life is supposed to go smooth. This was supposed to be easier. You had confidence in what you're doing. God had given you good work to do. But it's not as easy. The road looks a little harder. And I remember thinking, well, failure really stinks. It feels horrible. There's people praying that I would do well. God, why didn't it go well? Well, at the end of the process, it's still a little fresh. Like I said last time I preached, I think, I still have some wounds. You still have wounds from experiences. But I remember thinking, and my wife, huge encourager. I remember Jen saying, you're going to do this. You can do this. Do you know how many times I thought, I just want to quit. I just want to stop. You have voices in your head. You don't have to do that to be a pastor. You don't have to do that. This is like devil's work. You're getting into all kinds of doubt places, where people on the edge of belief, they don't really care too much about the church. They want to think about big ideas. And all those little voices go through your head. And then recently, this summer, and I'll tie it back, don't worry. Recently this summer, I was at a retreat, and somebody was praying, and they said, you didn't miss the exit. Oh, man, to hear that you're not traveling down the road and you hadn't missed the exit. Because there were many days when I thought, boy, I missed the exit. Boy, I'd rather be sitting in a tree observing than to have it get really personal. Because God seemed distant. He seemed far. He seemed like one of those those experiences where you couldn't get through the crowd to get to the front. If you could get to the front and you could say, God, really, I've done my best. This is it right here. This is not about me, but just in life in general. We've all been there where we say, I've done my best. But we can't seem to get all the way to him. And then he stops and he looks and he sees, and you know that he did not forget you. He saw you. That he did not leave you, that you had not failed in everything you thought you were working toward. You hadn't missed the exit. That's a big deal with God. He's not trying to help you miss the exit. He's trying to seek out and save your life. And save my life, and save my friend's life who has some bad experiences with religion, who's not sure about the church, but is looking from the outside, really wanting God to see them. Not so they can say, look, God saw me, but to say, God saw me on that road. And I was in a tree with nobody else sitting around, thought I was any good to go sit in. For have you come to my house, Jesus? Jesus wants to come to your house. You have not failed to the point where he's not guiding you, because our stuff is not our righteousness. He is our righteousness. When Jesus says, I walk into your house today, Zacchaeus, salvation has come to this house. It doesn't mean, Zacchaeus, clean up around yourself before I come to your house. It means I'm going to come to your house because I love you. I know you're a tax collector. I love you. I know you've stolen. I love you. I know you've given half away. I love you. But in spite of all that you've done, I love you. Salvation is here today. That's good news. God is always good. He will see you through. And that's not the end of the story, even when he sees you through. There's more unfolding. I remember sitting on that flight on the way home. It was horrible. It hadn't been for friends. I don't know if my friends will be watching, but I had friends there that day after that meeting. And I remember those friends. One guy just hugged me, cried with me, walked with me, and said, you know what? This is not the end. It's just one thing. God has something. And this guy knew what he was talking about because he's a missionary to Uganda. And he knows what real difficulty, real need looks like. And it's not sitting in an ivory tower in Scotland thinking this is the worst thing that could happen. But our pain is unique to us, isn't it? When you face difficulty in your life, it's unique to you. But friends that I stayed with encouraged me. Tim, you need to go through the reflection study, what it's like to reflect on things. When you get bad feedback, How do you process all that feedback? He was brilliant. And I thank God for that love. But in that process, I remember on the way home, the flight, one of the songs that I really liked, or really appreciated, I still really enjoy, Stephen Curtis Chapman. Some of you know he's an older or he's been making music for a really long time. And one of the songs, it's talking about the plan unfolding. And I forget, I should know the title better. Some of you probably know that title. But this idea that the plan is unfolding. And God's glorious plan is unfolding. It's not like stopped when things are difficult. It's not like stopped when you think you've come to the end of your career and you're sitting up a tree just watching what God wants to do. Because some of us feel that way sometimes. I just want to observe. I want to look. God's plan doesn't stop unfolding. And I remember Pastor Louis said something really encouraging recently to me. He said, Tim, if you don't hear God speaking sometimes, maybe you're on the right path. Maybe he's guiding you. I love that. That you haven't stopped. The plan's unfolding. Your plan is unfolding. God's church is unfolding. It's not done. So if you tell people, if they had a bad experience and the relationship with the church didn't bring them joy at first, or in the time they didn't know if it was good for them, just say, you know what, it's unfolding. I'm a part of the church and we're working on it. We're unfolding. And we're learning to love, learning to grow. God sees you. He sees you. He's guiding you. Let's pray.